December 1941, Berlin. The news arrives like a cold wind through ornate corridors. America has entered the war. In a room lit by old chandeliers and cigarette smoke, a man rises to speak. The moment is public and theatrical and oddly casual. His generals expect fury. Instead, he smiles. They expected panic, perhaps a proclamation of total war. He laughs and steps to the table as if announcing a minor victory. Then he makes three statements, three predictions about what American involvement will mean. One was delusional. The second was astute. The third would prove fatal. Each line would ripple through strategy, production, and the logistics that decide wars. What mattered was not rhetoric, but resources. Across the Atlantic sat an industrial base that could turn raw steel and oil into an ocean of ships, planes, and trucks. Factories in Detroit and Cleveland, shipyards building thousands of hulls, assembly lines capable of sustained output. It was a ledger of capacity against which battlefield audacity would be tested. But for him, in that shining moment, belief and bluster blurred. The scene in the Führerzimmer smelled of tobacco and leather. Boots clicked on marble. A file of papers lay damp with condensation. Joseph Goebbels cleared his throat. Wilhelm Keitel folded his hands. Alfred Jodl scanned a map and muttered numbers. Hermann Goering tapped a cigarette against an ashtray as the talk began. America will not be able to project power across two oceans, he said. They will bicker. They will slow themselves down. His voice was steady. Keitel replied, "But the factories, mein Führer, they can produce like nothing we have seen." Goebbels smiled. "Propaganda will shape men more than steel, Herr Führer." Jodl added softly, "We must not underestimate convoys and merchant tonnage." Goering waved a hand and said, "Their air force will take time to organize for distant operations." Hitler answered, "Then our submarines will strangle supply. Then the Atlantic will be ours." In that exchange there were 5 senses present. The glare of lamps reflected off metals. The rustle of maps filled the air. Coffee and smoke mingled. Hands trembled on cups. The metallic tang of worry lingered on the tongue. Those reactions mattered because they showed how leaders read capacity through prejudice. With that belief in mind, he issued the first prediction. The first prediction was simple and dangerous. He said that American entry would be indecisive and slow, and that Germany could outmaneuver a distracted giant. The claim sounded plausible to men who had seen European collapse, and who measured power by immediacy rather than scale. Officers like Keitel and Jodl nodded. Goebbels began drafting lines for the radio. The logic went like this. Distance saps strategy. Overseas coalitions argue. Democracy breeds delay. For a time, the Wehrmacht exploited this. Yet history responded immediately. Within months, American shipyards shifted output. Liberty ships multiplied. American factories cranked out aircraft and vehicles in numbers that overwhelmed local advantages. The first prediction was a misread of scale and logistics, and
it collapsed not because of battlefield courage, but because industry is a force multiplier that cannot be mocked. Pause here to get your take. Reflect on the surprise in that room and the cost that followed. Which of the 3 predictions do you think determined the outcome most decisively? Prev 1, Prev 2, or Prev 3? Explain your choice in the comments, starting with Prev 1, Prev 2, or Prev 3. Your answer helps shape future episodes and lets us know what evidence you want examined next. This is a community that tests hypotheses against archives. Tell us which claim you think was decisive and why, and we will follow the leads you give us. Now we return to the narrative to see how the second prediction almost worked. The second prediction was coldly strategic, and for a time it proved unnerving. He argued that tactical innovation and shock operations could compensate for Allied material advantages. The second was technical. It relied on speed, logistics, and concentrated armored thrusts to fracture opponent cohesion. For a while, blitzkrieg tactics continued to succeed. Supply lines, radio coordination, and doctrinal surprise gave victories that looked like strategy triumphing over numbers. Albert Speer noted factories could be relocated and streamlined. General Milch argued over production priorities. Admiral Rader warned about ship losses. Historical analysts such as Ian Kershaw and Richard Overy later argued that German operational art did extract more than its economic base promised. But this advantage had limits. The Allies adapted. Production practices at Willow Run and the Arsenal of Democracy concept turned quantity into presence. The second prediction was astute in the short term, but ultimately insufficient against sustained industrial mobilization. Then came the third prediction, and it was fatal. He claimed that political will and morale within Germany would outlast any material bombardment, and that eventual negotiation would preserve their gains. This was not a tactical judgment. It was ideological and dismissive of logistics. It undervalued raw supplies, fuel shortages, and the capacity to replace lost material. It assumed armies could be fed by faith. That miscalculation undercut every other plan, and it proved decisive when fuel stockpiles dwindled and railways jammed. Names like Speer, Himmler, and Albert Göring appear in the paperwork that recorded frantic orders to shift production and to conjure miracle weapons. The third prediction was a gamble on perseverance that ignored production math. The months that followed transformed strategy into arithmetic. Ship losses, convoy escorts, aircraft production, and truck output mattered more than speeches. Allied output across the war would number in the hundreds of thousands of aircraft and tens of thousands of ships and vehicles. Institutions such as the War Production Board and shipyards in the United States turned raw material into global reach. Historians like David Glantz and John Keegan emphasize logistics and numbers in their assessments. Krupp factories and Messerschmitt lines could not keep pace with an industrial system mobilized across oceans. Supply and logistics, not heroics, reshaped the map. The realization came slowly and then suddenly. Months of telegrams, maps stained with ink, exhausted commanders pleading for fuel. A scene in the bunker captured the collapse. Hitler sat at a table under a dim lamp. Speer opened a ledger. Keitel's jaw worked. Jodl read casualty reports aloud. "We have no reserves here," said Speer. "Our tanks cannot move without petrol," replied Keitel. "Our submarines are bleeding," said Rader. Hitler looked down at the map and said quietly, "Then we must change everything." The room smelled of cold cigarette smoke. Metal clinked as a glass was put down. The sound of a train whistle carried in from a distant station. Those minutes marked the shift from confident prediction to desperate improvisation. What did this set of statements cost? The lesson is strategic and grim. You cannot conflate political conviction with supply chains. You cannot predict outcomes of wars by declination alone. One prediction was delusional, one was temporarily clever, and the third hollowed out any hope of sustainable success. A contrafactual remains worth asking, what if? He had never declared open war on a nation with unmatched industrial capacity. Would different caution have prolonged survival or only delayed defeat? If this episode changed the way you think about how power is measured, subscribe for more data-driven narratives. We examine archives, official reports, and historians' primary sources so you can judge for yourself. Leave your comment starting with Prev 1, Prev 2, or Prev 3, and tell us which prediction you think was decisive and why. History often looks like personality until you unroll the balance sheets and the factories.
Sometimes the most dangerous enemy is not an army across a border, but the machine you failed to count.